Hello everyone and welcome back to another video, and this is probably the beginning of a couple videos where I'm gonna do some PCB overviews that I wanted to do for a time and never found time to do. And the first of those is the GTX 980Ti Strix revision 2.0. We've already had a 980Ti Strix, however that was the other revision, which actually has some pretty significant differences in how the VRM, specifically the vCore VRM, is built. So I wanted to revisit this revision 2.0, as you can see here, and look at this one, because I think this one is actually better. Like sometimes you see revision 2.0s being cheaped down variants, but this one's actually a beefed up one. And yeah, like as you can see, the card is not really that functional. There's a memory module missing, and it's pretty dirty. Even after cleaning, it still looks like this. And basically, yeah, it is still in the process of maybe getting repaired, but I was not able to find the time to learn how to swap memory modules yet. So we're doing this with it instead. So looking at the VRMs, we're gonna start with the biggest one, which is our vCore VRM. And that is this big block over here. I'm gonna include the input capacitors as well, why not? So this is our vCore VRM. It's controlled by this controller over here, which ASUS would like you to believe is an ASP1212, but actually this is just a CHL 8318. And I do now realize that you can't really see the writing very well on this. So let me switch that over to a different color. And that's a little bit too thick. There we go. Red's better. So yeah, and this is a 8-phase controller made by, well, Chill, which is now International Rectifier. The brand doesn't really exist anymore, and it's an 8-phase controller. How many phases do we have? Or more like, how many inductors do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So obviously there's gotta be some doubling going on, and if we look actually at the back of the card, we see nothing. So, is there any doubling going on? Well, so if you can zoom in, I think they perfectly happen to be in the shadows. So there's no doublers on the back, and you could almost miss these over here. Except for the one, they are just perfectly in the shadow. And then there should be... Oh no, is that all of them? Yeah, that's all 6 of them. Okay, so here we have our doublers. These should be IR 3598s, and these chips are, like, they can be used as dual drivers or also doublers, and in this case they're gonna be doublers, because we're taking 6 phases from our CHL 8318 and doubling them into 12. So yeah, that's how we're getting our 12 phases vCore. And what are the phases made of? Well, we have some actually very nice power stages over here, because each phase is getting an IR 3555 power stage. Those are 60 amp power stages. Now that's pretty nice. And yeah, so like the 980Ti is a card from around 2014. That's 7 years. I think more than 7 years now, because 2021 is already kind of coming to a close. Back then, 60 amp power stages were a really nice thing. And basically, from what I heard, ASUS bought essentially all of these, so basically no one else could use them. There are some, however, on the EVGA ePower 5, which coincidentally also uses a 12-phase vCore portion. So this vCore VRM on this 980 Ti is basically pretty much as close to an EVGA ePower5 just on a graphics card as you're gonna get. Maybe there's some of EVGA's own cards, like a couple Kingpin cards, but they usually have even more than 12 phases. It might be pretty similar to the 1080 Ti Kingpin. Actually, I don't know exactly how that one works. It's a bit too new. I don't really work with the 10 series and newer. But yeah, this is a very nice VRM. Like 12 times 60 amps, I haven't even bothered to calculate that because that's so high that you're never gonna use that up. Yeah, that's 720 amps that you could theoretically shove through this. Of course, at that point, the power stages would be so inefficient at running so hot that the VRM won't work anymore. But 720 amps is like, that's a lot. That's more than you're ever gonna need. Like, yeah, and that's the nice thing about this card. Compared to the reference 980 Ti, which literally has less than half of this vCore VRM, the reference has a 6-phase and is using 50 amp DR MOSes. So this is a very nice VRM, and if you ask me, this is gonna do any kind of benching you want, no problem, as long as you put a decent heatsink over the VRM, and of course as long as your card isn't dead like mine is. But yeah, that's just a very, very nice card, and they even give you this hookup for an Elma EVC2, because as you can see, it says VRM test switch on it, and this is just a hookup point to the I2C interface of the CLJ8318. So you don't even have to like put any physical volt mods on this thing. You can just take an EVC, connect it to the I2C port of this, and then just manually like just reprogram the voltage controller to do whatever you want. Of course, this only controls vCore. You're still gonna, because on Liquid Nitrogen, like, you probably also wanna tweak the memory, and then on Liquid Nitrogen you usually also tweak the PEX rail to get out of code boot bug issues. But yeah, so as far as controlling vCore goes, this is a very nice card. Like, it's a VRM that can handle a lot, and it's also a VRM that's very conveniently set up for you to just hook into. Like, it's at the edge of the card. You can access it from the back here, as you can see. There is a back plate, but like it's fairly easy to access. And yeah, basically just that. So let's move on to the other VRMs. So over here, actually on the left of the card, which is quite an unusual setup, we have our 2-phase VMEM VRM, which is controlled here by a UPI controller that I was not able to fully identify, partly because this card, as you can see on the image, is covered in flux so much that like even washing it several times still made it look like this. And the other part is a lot of UPI controllers are just not public, especially when dealing with companies like ASUS that rebrand other controllers into an imaginary thing that doesn't really exist, basically just to make it harder to find datasheets for them. So I was not able to find a datasheet for this controller, but I was able to read the part number, which I'm not entirely sure about, but I think this is either a UP15619 or a UP15617. I am not entirely sure about the last digit. I'm also not entirely sure about the 1, but I'm fairly certain I saw UP156. So if anyone wants to go on a controller hunt and find out what this is, that's what I know. And yeah, apart from that, here we have our memory VRM. So then around the card scattered we have a few more rails, like this over here. It's probably gonna be our PEX rail. This is usually where it sits at. Then this is actually probably input, 12 volt input filtering. but we have another rail where I put the controller names over. There's another rail over here, and then this could be, yeah, this is probably the BIOS chip. But that might be 1.8 volts. And then there should be, somewhere on the card, there should also be a 5 volt rail. Because power stages don't run on 12 volts, they run on 5 volts, and it's probably on the back. I should have checked this before making the video. Actually, no. I am not entirely sure where this card gets its 5 volts from. Or is what I thought is 1.8 volts actually 5 volts, and then 1.8 volts is somewhere else. Because that's probably input filtering. That one's input filtering. That one's input filtering. So these are probably power balancing MOSFETs. Here's 2 MOSFETs as well, but I don't see this could also be power balancing, because we have it right next to the input filtering inductor. I am actually not very certain where our 1.8 and 5 volt circuits are. So I'm just gonna say this is either 1.8 volts or 5 volts, and I just can't find the other one. It's not that important anyway. If you have the card in hand and wanna mess with one of the rails, you can just measure the voltage while it's running yourself, and then there's the issue solved. But yeah, the main thing I do care about is the VCore VRM, and actually we haven't exactly finished there yet, because there's one more component to a VRM that I haven't really talked about here yet, and that's the capacitors. So you can see in actually what ASUS does a lot, they just stacked a row of CAN type capacitors here. All of these are 2.5 volts, 820 microfarads, and well, yeah, CAN type capacitors are cheap, they're not very good, but if you just have a lot of them, they can still help with voltage stability. But usually on a fairly high-end card, which such is a Strix, you do want to see some more capacitors, and that's exactly what we're getting, because we are getting a number of 470 microfarad SMD polymer capacitors as well, including, which is very nice, I've only seen Gigabyte do this, but now I've also seen, at least on this card, that ASUS does it, 560 microfarad capacitors behind the core, which on the reference model are either 470 or 330. So yeah, we also have directly behind the core a small capacitor upgrade, which can potentially help. And then over here we have that's the backside of the memory VRM. So the memory also gets a fair amount of capacitance, which I think is very nice. Like, you could still have put more capacitors here, or at least like left empty pads. That would be really nice. I think a bunch of modders would just be delighted to see that. For some reason ASUS thought, let's just keep that, like, you can, well, there's some vias in that area, which could complicate things, but as I see, that's just VCore and ground plane over there. So yeah, you could, if you really wanted, just like scratch the solder mask off yourself and then make a mounting point yourself. So you can make it happen. But yeah, as far as VCore capacitors go, it's not the best I've ever seen. There's like Galax really went all out. EVGA also has some really good output capacitors, which this one can't match. But it's still a pretty good output filter. Like, we have the high capacitance behind the core. We have our row of SMD polymers behind the on the back, and then we just have a bunch of CAN types, which, while weak individually, if you use enough of them, they can still help, which ASUS has done. And then we also have these two capacitors here, which I am not entirely sure if they are on vCore or the memory. The way they're positioned, I would kind of think they are on the memory, because they are positioned on the other side of the memory VRM. So because the farther you go away from the memory VRM, the more your voltage is gonna drop. And these capacitors are basically exactly where you are most far away from the memory VRM. So that, yeah, they're basically there so that the voltage at the memory chips is kind of being kept steady and doesn't drop into, just plummet when there's a transient happening in the memory system. So, yeah. I think it's a really nice card. It's just a shame that mine is in such a bad condition. Because, like, yeah, it not just does it have this memory module missing, I think it also has this one being dead and this one being dead, which, as you can see, in 3, is it memory channels? I'm not entirely sure, but, like, we're missing, like, we have this dead, working, dead, working, dead, working kind of pattern here, which, under the original video where I took my first look at this card and diagnosed it, which, well, I mean, your diagnosis is fairly obvious, but I was also told that this kind of can be memory controller damage. In that case, the card will stay dead, because if the memory controller is in the core, and if the core is dead, there's not much I can do. But hoping that if I get 3 replacement memory chips and just put the missing one on and replace the 2 dead ones, I hope that I could get a working 980 Ti out of this. It's just that, like, the state of it is pretty bad. You can also see that the PCI Express slot, like the PCB material here, darkened a lot, and you can see it on the back the most. Also, like, the rubber pads melted. Yep, this was in an oven. Not done by me, but done by... Actually, so this card was sent in by a subscriber of the channel, and I think that person got the card from someone else, and that someone else had it in the oven. So yeah, like, the card is not in a very good state, and yeah. But ignoring the specific state of my card, if you have this card, I think this is a very, very nice 980 Ti. It's one of the nicer models and one of the more achievable ones, I would say, because the Hall of Fame and Kingpin cards are not just very expensive, they are just also very rare. So even if you have the money to buy one, it's just very hard to find one that's not getting immediately sold. But this one, the Strix, is fairly common from what I can tell. And from these more common cards, well, like, yeah, from the more common cards, there's basically the Gigabyte Windforce, which is just, yeah, that's an 8-phase with 50 amp DR MOSFETs, so this has better power stages and more phases. And then there's a bunch of reference PCB cards that are even worse, because they have 6 phases with 50 amp DR MOSFETs, which is literally less than half of what this card has. So of the more common 980 Ti's, this is definitely the best one. I just hope I haven't forgotten a 980 Ti yet. But yeah, I think it's a really nice card, and I think it's, yeah, I like this one more than the other card, because the revision 1.0 of this card is using a UPI controller, which I wasn't able to find a datasheet for. It's using much smaller power stages, which I don't know the current rating of, but I don't think they are 60 amps. And basically that's it. Like, it's using a controller that's less well known. Like, the CHA 318 is very common on high-end cards. The UP6 something that the 1.0 uses is, I don't think it's very common. And then the power stage is just smaller, like it doesn't mean big power stage always good, but there's only so much current capability you can cram into a small package. When the package is just so much smaller than these on this card, basically like it can only have less current capability. Also less surface area means it's gonna run hotter, so yeah. And I mean, I'm repeating myself here, but like, yeah, this is pretty much quite literally the same VR, like the closest you can get to just an EVGA E-Power just built into a graphics card. So yeah. So, I've already said what I think of this card, and I would be dragging out the video past 25 minutes at this point. Or, actually not, I think this should be short. I just had a lot of... Yeah, I started the recording and then shuffled things around on my desk, so I actually don't know how long the video is. But, yeah, so if you're still here, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. And until next time, goodbye.